$5,000, girl cash, right now. Or this small but very, very special package in your pretty little suitcase is going to get you in big, big trouble. The voice hit her like a gust of stale wind, thick with the scent of unfiltered Camel cigarettes and the arrogance of a man who had spent too long leaning on his badge and too little time brushing his teeth. It was the kind of voice that grated against decency, husky and confident, soaked in the smugness of middle age and a history of bad decisions. As it echoed through the strange, nearly deserted customs zone of Chicago's O'Hare International Airport, it felt even more out of place. Usually one of the busiest, most chaotic transit hubs in the world, O'Hare at that hour was quiet and naturally so. Cold neon lights flickered faintly above, casting a sterile, blue-white hue over scuffed tile floors that still gleamed in patches from years of hurried polishings. It was like stepping into a scene hastily emptied out for some poorly rehearsed play. Amidst this eerie quiet, the young woman drew immediate attention, not that she asked for it. She walked with quiet authority, the kind that needed no announcement. Her skin, a radiant honey gold, glowed under the pale airport lights. She wore a sleek grey business suit tailored flawlessly by a renowned Savile Row craftsman, fitted perfectly to accentuate her toned yet graceful figure, the kind that suggested discipline and confidence in equal measure. Her jet black hair was coiled into a high, professional bun, not a single strand out of place. It revealed a sharp, intelligent face. Cheekbones slightly raised, brows thick and groomed to a clean curve, lips full, and eyes large and luminous, a deep dark brown that seemed to pierce straight through pretense. Those eyes sparkled with something rare, a mix of determination and serenity, not just beauty, but presence. Trailing her right side was a compact black Toomey suitcase, polycarbonate gel and lightweight, expensive, tasteful, discreet. The kind of luggage favored by business travelers who knew better than to flaunt wealth, but didn't settle for less than quality. Everything about her suggested someone going somewhere important, no more, no less. But as she approached the random inspection area, if one could even call it that, the scene shifted into something off-kilter. A battered folding metal table stood awkwardly in the middle of the space, surrounded by crumpled paper signs, their marker-written warnings barely legible. Behind the table sat two men in uniform. One slouched so deeply in his chair he looked like part of it, tall, youngish, with eyes dulled by repetition and boredom. Officer Tom Henderson, the other man, however, was already rising to his feet as she approached, and not with politeness. His nameplate read Rizzo, his belly strained against the bottom buttons of his shirt. His uniform, too tight and poorly maintained, did nothing to hide the potbelly or the years of cynicism wrapped around his frame like a second badge. His silver insignia looked like it hadn't been polished in months. His face a mass of creases, and puffy jowls tightened into what he clearly thought was a serious, authoritative expression, but it came off more like a sneer. As he blocked her path with an outstretched arm, the young woman arched one finely trimmed brow, a flicker of controlled surprise darting across her face. Her eyes narrowed slightly, not in fear, but in calculation. "What package?" she asked, voice even, cool, and controlled. "I assure you I've brought nothing illegal in my luggage, officer." There wasn't the faintest tremor in her tone, not even a bead of sweat on her forehead. She was calm, confident, in complete control. Rizzo curled his lip into a knowing smirk, part insult, part threat, and glanced sideways at Henderson, who barely reacted, his tired eyes fixed on a far-off point, like he'd seen this act 1,000 times. "Well," Rizzo drawled, voice slow and mocking, "we're the law enforcement guys here, aren't we, Henderson?" No response. Was there really something hidden in her luggage? A prohibited item, a dangerous package slipped in without her knowledge? Or was this nothing more than a dirty setup, a poorly staged drama meant to trap an innocent traveler? And who was this young woman who carried herself like steel wrapped in silk? Her name was Nua, and she wasn't just any traveler. She was an elite undercover agent of the FBI. Nua wasn't just any federal agent, she was one of the most respected and capable operatives in the FBI's elite division focused on organized crime and international human trafficking. For nearly 3 months, she had been deeply embedded in the seedy underworld of Amsterdam, Netherlands, operating under deep cover. The mission had been one of the most complex and dangerous of her career, involving countless layers of deception, false identities, and psychological manipulation. Her objective had been to monitor, infiltrate, and gather incontrovertible evidence against a sophisticated transnational human trafficking syndicate, one specializing in the abduction and illegal transportation of women and children from vulnerable Eastern European nations into the heart of Western Europe and the United States. These victims were forced into a life of prostitution, sweatshop labor, and other illicit activities, robbed of their dignity and any chance at freedom. The trafficking network operated like a multinational corporation, well-funded, strategically distributed, and shielded by layers of legal and political protection. Its leaders were careful, elusive, and ruthless, making it a nearly impossible target to dismantle without inside access. That access had come through Noor, who risked her life daily by earning the trust of its lieutenants and gathering evidence piece by piece. Surveillance footage, coded phone transcripts, falsified passports, and witness testimonies. Noor had it all meticulously documented, stored securely in encrypted drives, now tucked into her inner jacket lining. Now, having successfully completed her mission, Noor was on a direct return flight from Amsterdam back to FBI headquarters in Chicago. Her objective was clear: deliver the operation's results in person to her superiors, finalize a full debrief, and prepare for the next operation, which was rumored to be even more dangerous. But nothing could be allowed to go wrong, not now, not after all she had risked. The mission's success had not only exposed a critical link in a global human trafficking ring, but also put powerful criminals on notice. Any misstep, any exposure could blow the cover she had worked so hard to maintain and possibly endanger her life and those of the victims she sought to save. To ensure the safety of herself and the confidentiality of the intelligence she carried, Noor followed a strict protocol whenever she traveled. Her priority was to maintain a low profile at all costs. She didn't fly first class, she never used her real name. She wore conservative, professional clothing and projected the image of a corporate executive, a senior financial consultant, perhaps someone constantly jetting between countries for high-level business meetings and global finance summits. She carried herself with poise, always keeping interactions polite but distant, and never attracting undue attention. Even her suitcase was chosen with care, sleek, durable, and unremarkably stylish. To any observer, she was just another busy professional woman on a tight schedule. She had no idea that this time, the greatest threat to her mission would not come from international criminals or ruthless traffickers, but from the very people who claimed to uphold the law. At the same time, in a different corner of O'Hare International Airport, officers Frank Rizzo and Tom Henderson sat hunched over their unofficial inspection station. These two weren't heroes in uniform, they were predators hiding behind the law. Members of the Chicago Airport Police Force, they were charged with ensuring the safety and order of one of the world's busiest airports. But for years, they had perverted that authority into something sinister. Their side operation had been running smoothly for a long time, perhaps too long. And it was no secret, at least among some circles, that they operated with the protection of unseen hands, possibly from inside the department or higher up in the local chain of command. Their modus operandi was simple but effective. They targeted passengers who looked affluent, foreign, or vulnerable, women traveling alone, minorities, or tourists unfamiliar with US laws. Their preference was for those they assumed wouldn't resist or complain. Once marked, the passenger would be pulled into a fake random inspection. Rizzo, always the ringleader and mastermind, would slyly slip a small packet of fake contraband, usually powdered sugar, flour, or baby powder, into the victim's bag. These harmless substances were disguised to resemble illegal drugs, stored in cigarette packs or chewing gum wrappers in his uniform pocket. He'd acquired the habit of stealing baby powder from his own wife's cabinet. He liked the irony. Then the shakedown would begin. Threats of arrest, grim warnings of federal prison. Subtle suggestions that things could go away for the right price. What they didn't know was that this time, they had picked the wrong woman. Officer Tom Henderson hadn't always imagined himself becoming part of something dirty. Fresh out of the academy, he had joined the Chicago Airport Police Force with genuine intentions, perhaps naive, perhaps overly optimistic, but sincere. He had pictured himself protecting travelers, intercepting smugglers, and maybe even making headlines one day for stopping some big-time criminal. But reality had a different path waiting for him, one paved not with honor, but with shadows. From the beginning, Frank Rizzo, his senior partner, had taken him under his wing. At first, Henderson had felt flattered. Rizzo was respected by many in the department, mostly out of fear or obligation, but still he had clout, a voice that carried. Friends in high places, connections. Henderson had assumed Rizzo saw potential in him, and maybe he had. But not for anything noble. When Rizzo first introduced the side hustle, just a little extra, nothing serious, he'd said. Henderson froze. The idea of using their badge to frame innocent people, to plant fake evidence and extort money, had made his stomach churn. But Rizzo had leaned in close, voice low and threatening. In that way, he had mastered. He talked about loyalty, about how departments could be unkind to officers who didn't play ball. He hinted at connections, people who'd look the other way or worse, look right at you and do nothing. Henderson had been cornered, and then came the money. It was shockingly easy, too easy, thousands of dollars from a single incident, and all it took was a lie, a staged search, and a few well-placed threats. The fear in the eyes of the victims, mostly foreign travelers, women alone, minorities who feared the law, haunted Henderson at night. Still, the envelopes of cash kept coming, and with them, a numbing of the conscience. Over time, guilt settled into the background like static, always there, never quite loud enough to stop him. He tried not to think about what would happen if the truth came out. But sometimes, in the quiet of a patrol car or during his long walks to the terminal, he imagined handcuffs clicking around his own wrists. That morning, as Flight KL 611 from Amsterdam taxied in, Henderson sat at the fake inspection station, an ugly folding table propped against a peeling wall, trying to shake off sleep. His eyes were half closed when Rizzo nudged him with a boot. "Look alive, Henderson," Rizzo whispered, nodding toward the arrival gate. "The big fish just came in." Henderson looked up and saw her, Nuardobio. She moved like someone important, head held high, steps sure and measured, her entire appearance radiating purpose and power. Her tailored grey suit, expensive carry-on, and focused expression made her look every bit the successful international businesswoman. Rizzo grinned, rubbing his hands together with barely contained glee. "Looks like she's loaded," he muttered, "traveling alone, just the kind we like. No big guy to step in and mess things up, let's give her a warm welcome." Without delay, the two officers sprang into action, dragging out their well-rehearsed charade. They propped up the rickety folding table again and planted their crumpled signage, the same makeshift inspection area they'd used countless times before. Located just past the baggage claim, in a quiet corner away from most of the traffic, it gave them a discreet stage to perform their little act. As Nia rolled her Toomey suitcase toward them, Rizzo intercepted her with exaggerated seriousness. His bloated figure blocked her path, his badge tilted slightly on his chest like it had given up trying to look respectable. "Good afternoon, ma'am," he said, voice laced with faux professionalism. "We're with the Chicago Airport Police Force. As per protocol, we're conducting random security checks on selected passengers' luggage. We'll need you to follow us to the private screening room." The tone was polite, but the arrogance behind it wasn't hidden. Nia's eyes narrowed, just slightly. She had passed through the primary customs checkpoint without incident. There had been no alarms, no questions, nothing to justify this second screening. Still, her training kicked in, drawing attention by arguing here, in public, wasn't wise. The wrong scene in the wrong place could spiral quickly, and she couldn't afford that. Not with what she was carrying, not with who she was. "Very well," she replied, her voice calm and clipped, "I'm willing to cooperate." The officers led her down a narrow hallway, tucked behind a line of airport staff officers, into a cramped and stuffy screening room. The walls were dingy, the air stagnant, a flickering fluorescent bulb buzzed overhead. Inside was a single battered desk, 3 plastic chairs, and a cheap security camera mounted high in the corner. A bad place for anyone, and a very bad place to underestimate someone like Nuardobio. However, Nuardobio had not spent years working deep undercover, risking her life infiltrating some of the world's most dangerous criminal networks, to be shaken by two low-level airport officers running an amateur shakedown. The moment she stepped into the cramped, foul-smelling screening room, her sharp senses went into overdrive. She quickly assessed everything: the placement of the chairs, the flickering light above, the cheap security camera hanging loosely in the upper corner of the room. Something was off. Her eyes lingered on the camera for a moment longer. Its angle was wrong. Cameras in federal or airport buildings were always positioned to capture full room coverage for accountability. This one, however, was skewed slightly downward and sideways, intentional, perhaps. More damning still, she noticed a small, dark shape barely visible along the edge of the lens, a smudge or obstruction. No, it was a piece of black electrical tape, carefully placed to block the view of anyone reviewing the footage later. These men had prepared. Whatever was about to happen, they had planned it in advance. Officer Henderson, trying much too hard to act casual, started asking her a string of pointless questions. "So, are you here on business or vacation?" he asked, eyes darting around nervously, as if checking for an audience. "Amsterdam must have been interesting, right? You were there long." His tone was practiced, but there was an underlying tension. Neil noted how his voice cracked slightly at the end of his sentences. He was acting, distracting her. She could feel it. As Henderson babbled, Rizzo wasted no time. Ignoring her polite but firm objection, "Officer, I'd prefer you wait for my consent or produce a warrant." He unzipped her Toomey suitcase with practiced ease. He barely even looked at the contents, diving instead for a hidden side lining. Nia's eyes locked onto his hands. What he did next was so quick, so smooth, that only someone like her trained to observe every micro-movement would catch it. From inside his palm, concealed expertly, he slipped a small plastic packet deep into the fabric lining of the suitcase. The move took less than 2 seconds, like a magician palming a coin, a setup. Then came the performance. Rizzo rummaged through her belongings theatrically, making a show of inspecting clothes, folders, even her spare shoes, before his eyes widened, feigned surprise upon discovering the planted packet. He pinched it between 2 fingers, holding it aloft like a trophy, his expression shifting into mock indignation. Well, he said with a grimace, "what do we have here?" Henderson, taking his cue, stood up abruptly and gasped, clearly overdoing the part. "Oh my God!" he exclaimed, eyes wide in pretend shock. "Miss, what is this? It looks like cocaine or something. This is serious." Nia stared coldly at the small, translucent packet resting on Rizzo's sweaty fingertips. A white powdery substance, baby powder, sugar, or maybe flour used to mimic drugs. It didn't matter what it really was. What mattered was the illusion. Her eyes then moved to Rizzo's face, reading every tick, every twitch of the smug smile curling on his lips. Then to Henderson, nervous, jittery, unsure of himself even now. It was clear they thought they'd cornered her. "It's not mine," she said evenly, her voice steady and low. "That wasn't in my suitcase before I handed it over. Either there's been a mistake, or someone deliberately placed that there while I was distracted. I request that both the suitcase and the packet be fingerprinted immediately." Rizzo laughed a sharp, cruel sound. "That's what they all say, sweetheart," he sneered, his tone laced with derision. "But this isn't looking good. You know what this could mean. This much powder, if it tests positive, could land you in prison for years. Bye-bye, career. Bye-bye, high-end job. Bet you worked real hard to get where you are, didn't you?" Then, as if it wasn't enough to threaten her with arrest, he leaned in slightly and began to lace his words with something even more disgusting: thinly veiled racist and sexist undertones. He hinted that women like her, young, beautiful, well-dressed, women of color flying solo through international airports, were often couriers, ambitious types trying to get rich quick by trafficking drugs. Glamour life, fast money, designer suits here, I've seen it before. Nia's fists clenched slightly at her sides, the insult hung in the air like smoke. She felt a fire light in her chest, not just for herself, but for every woman, every traveler who had been subjected to this treatment and hadn't been able to fight back. Still, she controlled herself. Her training taught her that anger clouded strategy. And she needed clarity now more than ever. She would not break, not here, not now. She was going to turn this trap against them. Officer Rizzo leaned back against the plastic desk, arms folded, eyes narrowed like a predator savoring the moment before striking. He took his time, relishing every second of control he believed he had over her. Then, with a voice that oozed counterfeit sympathy and sleazy manipulation, he began to speak slowly, deliberately like a practiced con man delivering his best pitch. "You know," he said, his tone softening just slightly, "we're not monsters. We're human beings too. We understand people make mistakes, bad luck, wrong place, wrong time. Happens more often than you'd think." He paused, watching Nia's face carefully, gauging her reaction, then took a slow step closer, lowering his voice as if he were offering a secret way out. "Maybe this is just an unfortunate little situation," he said. "A moment of poor judgment, a youthful mistake. We don't want to ruin your life over something like this. You seem like a smart woman, classy, not the usual type." Henderson stood a few feet behind, arms crossed tightly, eyes flitting between Rizzo and Nia. He didn't say a word, but his silence spoke volumes. He was in deep now, just as guilty, complicit in the charade. Rizzo continued, licking his lips, voice now filled with poison-coated suggestion. "There's always a way out, if you know how to cooperate wisely." Another pause. A longer one this time. Then the real offer came. $5,000, he said calmly. "That's all cash, right now, no paperwork, no charges. We'll forget this whole thing ever happened. You'll walk right out of here, smooth as silk. Back to your meetings, your fancy hotels, your little life. No harm done. What do you say, sweetheart? Doesn't that sound like a fair trade for a clean slate?" He grinned vile, confident, like a man who believed he'd won. For a brief moment, Nia felt the heat of her own rage rising like lava beneath the surface. Every cell in her body ached to grab him by the collar, slam his face into the desk, and show him exactly who she was. But years of training and discipline had prepared her for moments just like this. She took a deep breath and let it out slowly, relaxing her shoulders. She kept her face perfectly still, neutral, unreadable. The look of a cornered but scared woman, a performance. Inside, her mind was working faster than ever. She knew she couldn't argue with them, not now. They were predators, and predators thrived on fear and confrontation. If she resisted openly, it could escalate quickly. She had no backup in the room, no legal protection, and no way to guarantee her safety, yet she had to stay calm, focused. Instead of denying the obvious setup again, which she knew was futile, she changed tactics. She adopted the voice of someone genuinely shaken, someone unsure. "5,000, she murmured, her voice trembling just enough to seem authentic. "That's a lot of money for me to have on hand. I mean, I wasn't expecting something like this. Can I have a moment to think about it?" She glanced around the tiny room, pretending to search for comfort, but in truth she was memorizing every detail: the position of the door, the angle of the table, the layout of the walls. The broken camera in the corner, her eyes paused on that camera again. Obstructed or not, there was still a small chance it had captured something. Maybe Rizzo had been careless, maybe his arrogance had blinded him just enough to slip up. Then, in one smooth, subtle motion that would have been invisible to untrained eyes, Nia reached her left hand across her body and gently tapped the screen of her Apple Watch. It looked like a nervous tick, but it was the trigger. The device, custom issued by the FBI for undercover operatives, was now silently recording high-fidelity audio and transmitting encrypted data to a secure cloud server monitored by her command center in Chicago. Every word Rizzo said, every threat, every mention of the bribe. All of it was being captured in real time. Across from her, Henderson was beginning to fidget. He looked at Rizzo, then back at Nia. "She's stalling," he muttered. "I don't like this." Rizzo's fake patience finally cracked, his face contorted into a snarl. "Listen, girl," he growled, dropping all pretense of civility. "You don't have all day to sit there and play games. Make your decision now, or we escalate this to a formal case. We hand you, and all this evidence." He held up the fake drug packet again, over to the boys at the D. "They won't be so understanding." Nia didn't flinch. Her mind was clear now. She had what she needed. And this wasn't over, not by a long shot. Rizzo leaned in, voice tightening as he repeated the threat, this time with more emphasis. I'm afraid things won't be so simple and easy to resolve. Do you understand me? His eyes narrowed, and he spat out the acronym like a loaded weapon. D. He knew the weight that name carried, the fear it could trigger, but Nya didn't blink. She stared back into his eyes, those greedy, shifty eyes, gleaming with arrogance, and calmly decided that the moment had come to make her move. Her hand didn't tremble, her voice didn't shake. "Okay," she said with a slow exhale, her tone sounding weary and defeated. "I accept your offer." Rizzo's expression changed instantly. He looked like a wolf who had cornered an injured deer, triumphant, smug. He clapped his hands lightly and said, "Smart, very smart. You're a sensible woman. But," he added, raising a finger, "just remember, no funny business. You'll call your people now, and you'll do it on speakerphone. We want to hear everything. You try anything slick, and you'll regret it. I promise you." Nya nodded slowly, still keeping her expression just shy of frightened. She reached into her luxurious Hermes Birkin bag and pulled out her sleek iPhone 14 Pro Max, its polished surface glinting under the dull fluorescent light. With practiced ease, she unlocked it, her fingers moving gracefully across the screen. She opened her contacts and tapped a number saved under a harmless alias, J. Carpenter. It was a cover name, one that would raise no alarms, but it was actually the direct hotline to the Chicago FBI Field Office Emergency Response Unit. Rizzo and Henderson leaned in slightly as she hit the speaker button. The phone rang only once before a calm, authoritative male voice answered on the other end. "Chicago Federal Bureau of Investigation Office, Special Agent David Miller speaking. How may I help you?" "Perfect." Nya shifted in her seat, her voice trembling just enough to keep up the act. "John, hi, it's me, Nya," she said, pausing as if swallowing anxiety. I'm in a bit of trouble here, big trouble. I'm at O'Hare International Airport, Security Room 3, Section C, right near international arrivals. I need you to bring me $5,000, cash, immediately." She kept her voice steady but firm, loud enough so that every word rang clear in the tiny room. "There are two officers here," she continued. "One is named Rizzo, the other is Henderson. They said I had contraband in my luggage and are threatening to arrest me." Rizzo flinched at the sound of his name being so boldly uttered. Henderson shot him a glance, confusion flashing across his face. It was subtle, but the seed of panic had been planted. They weren't sure anymore. Maybe this woman wasn't just a scared rich traveler. Maybe something else was going on. There was a brief pause on the line, but Nya knew what was happening. Agent Miller and his team were already mobilizing. Then his voice came back on, cool and composed, but with a steel edge beneath it. "Understood, Nya, we've got you. Stay calm, don't provoke them, do nothing that puts you in danger. We'll be there within 15 to 20 minutes. Try to keep them in the room." "Yes," she replied, her voice soft, subdued. "Please hurry." As the call ended, Rizzo tried to mask his nervousness by chuckling and waving a dismissive hand. "Family member, huh? Let's hope they know how to move fast. I don't like waiting." Henderson mumbled something unintelligible, clearly growing anxious. His confidence had begun to unravel. He wiped his palms against his uniform pants and avoided Nya's gaze. 15 long, silent minutes passed. The room's stale air was thick with tension. Rizzo paced slowly. Henderson sat, fidgeting, his foot tapping erratically. Nya remained composed, never breaking her role, never hinting that justice was barreling toward them like a freight train. Then, without warning, the door burst open. It wasn't a scared relative with crumpled bills. It was for men in plain clothes, but nothing about them was ordinary. They moved like a unit, alert, confident, lethal. Their presence changed the air in the room. Leading the group was a broad-shouldered man with silver grey hair cut close to his head, a square jaw, and eyes the colour of steel, piercing and unblinking. He stepped forward without hesitation, his voice clear and firm. "Agent Adobio," he said, nodding, "are you okay?" Nya stood slowly, brushing imaginary dust off her blazer, her face breaking into a faint smile. "Perfect timing," she said coolly. "I was just about to hand over $5,000 for a fake crime I didn't commit." Rizzo turned white. Henderson's knees buckled slightly, the trap had snapped shut. Special Agent David Miller stepped forward, his voice calm but edged with unmistakable authority. "Are you okay, Agent Adobio?" he asked, eyes locking on hers. Though his tone carried genuine concern, he still radiated the firm composure of a senior federal commander fully in control of the unfolding situation. New gave him a silent nod of affirmation, her body language now that of a soldier standing tall in the face of a crumbled enemy line. But Miller didn't wait for her verbal reply. He turned on his heel with precision, facing the two stunned airport officers who had frozen mid-breath, still trying to process what was happening. Officer Rizzo's hands hovered uselessly by his belt, while Henderson stood slack-jawed, visibly pale under the harsh fluorescent light. The atmosphere had shifted entirely. The predator had become the prey. Miller reached into the inside pocket of his dark-tailored suit and pulled out a gleaming metal badge, its polished surface catching the light like a blade. He held it up high and steady, emblazoned on it were the letters FBI, and perched above was the unmistakable image of the majestic eagle, wings outstretched in the seal of justice. "This is Special Agent in Charge David Miller, Federal Bureau of Investigation," he declared, his voice cutting clean through the stunned silence. "Chicago Field Office, Organized Crime and Corruption Division." He took a single deliberate step forward. "Are you Officer Frank Rizzo and Officer Tom Henderson, currently assigned to the Chicago O'Hare International Airport Police Department?" Both men instinctively nodded, their voices frozen in their throats. "We have received an urgent and credible tip-off regarding your alleged involvement in corruption, abuse of authority, and the attempted extortion of a U.S. citizen on federal property. You are both now under investigation." Nya, standing behind him, took a breath and stepped forward as well. The scared, uncertain, and vulnerable traveler from just moments earlier had completely vanished. In her place now stood Special Agent Nya Adobio, shoulders squared, chin high, voice steady and resolute. "Thank you for arriving in time, sir," she said with clarity and composure. "These are the two individuals who intentionally planted a package containing a suspicious white powder in my luggage. They then demanded $5,000 in cash to make it all disappear. This was an organized act of intimidation, coercion, and blatant extortion." Her words landed like hammer blows. Rizzo's face turned the color of ash, drained of every ounce of confidence. His lips parted, but no sound came out at first. Finally, he managed to stutter a few syllables, voice quivering with disbelief. "FBI, no, this isn't, this can't be." He turned his gaze back to Nya, the same woman he had sneered at, threatened, and dismissed, and then to Miller, who now stood flanked by three stone-faced agents blocking the only exits. The realization hit him with cruel, crushing force. They hadn't set a trap. They had walked directly into one. Officer Henderson's reaction was worse. He began visibly shaking, his body trembling like a paper in the wind. His knees buckled, and he nearly collapsed to the ground. No, this is a mistake, a huge misunderstanding. We didn't mean. We didn't do anything wrong," he babbled, voice cracking with rising panic. His words were empty, hollow, nothing more than desperate noise in the face of inevitable accountability. Rizzo, who had long built a reputation in the department for being sly, assertive, and quick on his feet, now fell apart like a house of cards in a thunderstorm. Stripped of his power and pretense, he suddenly dropped to his knees on the scuffed floor. Clasping his hands like a child begging for mercy, he bowed his head and stammered, "Sir, Agent Chief, please, dear agent, beautiful, talented lady, we didn't know. We didn't recognize you were federal law enforcement. It was a joke, a foolish, stupid mistake. We beg for your forgiveness. We'll never do it again. Please don't ruin our lives. Have mercy." Special Agent Miller didn't blink. He didn't even glance at Rizzo's pathetic display. With a simple wave of his hand, he ordered, "Search the subjects, secure this room. Gather every document, object, and device that could be considered evidence." Nya removed her sleek Apple Watch and handed it to one of the agents. "This contains a full audio recording of the interaction," she said. "The threats, the bribe solicitation, all of it. You'll find everything you need." The agent nodded and began playback. Rizzo's voice, sinister and confident just minutes earlier, now echoed through the room, replayed with crystal clarity undeniable and damning. Meanwhile, another agent recovered the planted white powder package. It was carefully sealed inside an evidence bag, labeled and tagged for testing. Later results would confirm what Muir had suspected. It was nothing but powdered sugar, not cocaine or any other illegal drug. The entire setup had been an elaborate, reckless ploy. And now, justice had arrived to tear it all apart. Although Officer Rizzo had cunningly turned the security camera in the corner of the inspection room ever so slightly to limit its field of view, it still captured key moments enough to expose his actions. The footage clearly showed him illegally rummaging through Nia's suitcase without a valid search warrant or passenger consent. Even more damning, the camera caught him furtively slipping a small item later confirmed to be the bag of powdered sugar into the suitcase. When he thought no one was watching, his body language was nervous, deliberate, and unmistakably deceptive. It was the final visual proof tying him directly to the staged entrapment attempt. Faced with this mounting and irrefutable body of evidence, Officer Tom Henderson broke down entirely. The pressure, the humiliation, and the weight of the FBI's presence left him with no room to maneuver. He slumped into a chair, head in hands, eyes wide with guilt and fear. Gone was the officer who had strutted with false confidence and arrogance just 30 minutes ago. In his place sat a shattered man, broken by the realization that the walls had truly closed in. Without resistance or legal posturing, Henderson confessed everything. He provided a full, detailed account of their actions. He revealed how he and Rizzo had orchestrated the scheme from identifying vulnerable-looking passengers, particularly minorities or foreigners traveling alone, to planting fake contraband in their luggage and intimidating them into paying cash bribes. He admitted that this wasn't their first time, far from it. This was a refined, repeated operation that had gone on for years, dozens of victims, likely more. Most had paid and walked away silently, too afraid to challenge the airport authorities, too powerless to fight back. With her cover blown in the best possible way and the situation firmly under FBI control, Muir Dobbio quickly transitioned back into her full role as a law enforcement professional. The days of training, the months in the field, and the years of experience snapped into place like a machine clicking into perfect gear. She worked closely with Special Agent David Miller and the rest of the team, taking initiative and coordinating with precise efficiency. She gave a first-hand account of the events, submitted her smartwatch audio recordings, and cross-verified the events captured by the security footage. But her efforts didn't stop there. Muir was determined to dig deeper. She examined the physical layout of the isolated inspection room, pointing out how its position, away from main foot traffic, had allowed such abuses to go unchecked for so long. She highlighted the unusual placement of the single camera, noting how easy it was to tilt or obscure. She studied the officers' patterns and routines, identifying signs that this wasn't a spontaneous act, but a structured system, a scheme carefully designed and repeatedly deployed. Her observations led to a chilling conclusion. This wasn't just the wrongdoing of two rogue officers. It had the hallmarks of a wider conspiracy, potentially implicating others inside the department or beyond. The commanding officer of the Chicago O'Hare International Airport Police Force was alerted immediately. Upon learning that two of his men had not only framed a federal agent, but also potentially abused dozens of travelers through entrapment and extortion, his reaction was a mixture of disbelief, outrage, and shame. He escalated the matter swiftly, reporting it to city officials, state oversight boards, and the Department of Justice. Within hours, the FBI launched a formal internal investigation into the O'Hare Police Department. A special task force was assembled to look into the possibility of systemic corruption. Rizzo and Henderson were immediately placed under arrest and suspended from all duties, pending criminal charges. Their personnel files, financial records, communication logs, and even their past casework were placed under scrutiny. Under intense, methodical FBI interrogation, Officer Henderson, still rattled and guilt-ridden, continued cooperating. He described how Rizzo was the ringleader, how they selected targets based on vulnerability, and how they had split the illicit profits. He admitted they'd pulled in tens of thousands of dollars a month through this illegal racket. Henderson begged for leniency, hoping his honesty would help reduce his sentence. Eventually, even Rizzo, cornered by evidence and betrayed by his own partner's confessions, broke down. Though he tried to rationalize his behavior, blaming his financial struggles and the corrupt system that, he claimed, pushed him to the edge, no one was moved. The excuses didn't wash. He was no victim. He was the architect. For Agent Nuardobio, this wasn't just about personal vindication. This was about truth, accountability, and justice. She knew there were more victims, people too scared or disillusioned to speak up. And she vowed to see this case through to the very end, not for herself. Not just for the FBI, but for every traveler who had suffered in silence. Justice, she believed, must be made louder than fear. Tom Henderson and Frank Rizzo were formally indicted by the United States Attorney's Office on a series of serious federal charges, including abuse of power while performing official duties, organized extortion, conspiracy, and the intentional entrapment of innocent people for the purpose of embezzling property. The case rapidly gained widespread media attention and became one of the most publicized corruption trials involving law enforcement officers in recent Chicago history. A few months later, during the highly anticipated trial, Tom Henderson stayed true to his promise to the investigators. He pleaded guilty to the charges and agreed to fully cooperate with the prosecution. Henderson's decision was strategic. He hoped that by assisting the government and testifying against his co-defendant and former partner Frank Rizzo, the alleged mastermind behind the entire scheme, he might receive a lighter sentence than the one typically prescribed for such crimes. Henderson's confession laid bare the depth of the corruption, detailing how Rizzo had manipulated the system for years to exploit travelers, especially those who were vulnerable or from minority communities. Frank Rizzo, however, remained stubborn, cunning, and unrepentant throughout the proceedings. Despite the overwhelming, irrefutable evidence presented by the prosecution, and after many days of intense litigation and cross-examinations in court, the jury of 12 reached a unanimous verdict. Rizzo was found guilty on all charges. The presiding judge, after carefully weighing the severity of the offences and the extensive harm they had caused to public trust and the victims involved, sentenced Frank Rizzo to 4 years in federal prison. In contrast, Tom Henderson's cooperation earned him a more lenient sentence. He received a 2-year suspended sentence and was placed on probation for 3 years. Both men were permanently dismissed from the Chicago O'Hare International Airport Police Department and stripped of all related benefits, including their pensions, a harsh reminder that corruption would not be tolerated within the ranks of those sworn to uphold the law. Agent Nuardobio attended the sentencing hearing not as a victim seeking personal revenge, but as a crucial witness and a representative of justice and reason. Her presence symbolized the courage it takes to stand up against corruption within the very institutions entrusted with protecting the public. She was an example of unwavering integrity and professionalism, qualities desperately needed to restore faith in law enforcement. This case sent shockwaves through the Chicago O'Hare International Airport Police Department and the city at large. The scandal exposed vulnerabilities in the system and prompted a large-scale, unprecedented inspection and reform within the airport police force. Authorities acted decisively to root out any remaining bad apples who threatened the reputation and honor of true law enforcement officers. Numerous procedures, codes of conduct, and internal monitoring mechanisms were reviewed, tightened, and modernized to prevent the recurrence of such abuses. For Agent Nuer, this experience was both a profound reminder and a valuable lesson about the constant temptations and challenges faced by law enforcement officers. The dark side of power, the allure of material gain, and the risk of moral compromise lurk in every corner, every hour. Yet, it also strengthened her resolve, reinforcing her dedication to integrity, courage, and her passion for justice. She understood that the fight against crime, especially corruption within the ranks, is long, arduous, and unending. It requires relentless vigilance and an unyielding commitment to truth and fairness. The lesson this case imparted is clear and undeniable: no crime, no matter how cleverly concealed, can remain hidden forever, especially crimes committed by those who claim to protect the law but instead exploit it for personal gain. Blind greed and deep-seated discrimination, based on false prejudices, will always lead to the downfall of the perpetrators and the triumph of justice. Ironically, it is often those who consider themselves the smartest and most cunning who become the helpless prey in the very trap justice sets. What do you think about the 4-year prison sentence handed down to Frank Rizzo? Is it enough to deter future acts of corruption and abuse of power, or is it still too lenient compared to the damage he caused? If you were in Agent Nuardobio's position, facing such a dangerous and carefully orchestrated entrapment, would you have handled the situation differently? Or do you believe the plan she devised was the most effective way to protect herself and expose the crime? This story also raises broader questions about the importance of integrity and professional ethics in law enforcement agencies. It reminds us all ordinary citizens included that we have a vital role in monitoring, detecting, and courageously denouncing wrongdoing whenever it occurs. Only through collective vigilance and a shared commitment to justice can we hope to build a society that is truly just, transparent, and respectful of the rule of law. Thank you for taking the time to listen to this story. If you found this content meaningful, click like and subscribe so you won't miss the next powerful story. Tomorrow, we'll bring you another that matters.